Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Renuka and with me is R.S. Raghu bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring to you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says India is marching towards becoming world's third biggest economy. New Delhi to hold International Ministerial Conference on countering financing of terrorism on 18th of this month. India and Cambodia signed 4 MOUs in areas of culture, wildlife and health. US President Joe Biden pledges US will work with Southeast Asian nations together to tackle climate issues to rule-based order. 7th edition of Indo-French Joint Air Exercise culminates in Jodhpur in Rajasthan. And in sports, Shiva Thapa wins silver medal at Asian Elite Boxing Championships in Jordan. And in cricket, England to clash with Pakistan in T20 World Cup final in Melbourne on Sunday. And now the news in detail. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated and laid foundation stone of a slew of development projects at Ramagundam in Telangana on Saturday evening. Speaking at the event, Mr. Modi said development projects worth 10,000 crore rupees launched today will give a boost to the agriculture and business climate of the state. The Prime Minister said during the ongoing crisis in the world, global experts agree India is moving in direction of becoming third biggest economy in the world. He said many experts around the world are upbeat about the growth trajectory of the Indian economy.
पूरी दुनिया में एक और बात प्रमुखता से सुन रहे हैं। दुनिया के तमाम एक्सपर्ट कह रहे हैं कि भारत बहुत जल्द दुनिया की तीसरी सबसे बड़ी इकोनॉमी बनकर के उस दिशा में तेज गति से आगे बढ़ रहा है।
Mr. Modi said with the aspiration to become a developed nation, a confident new India is in front of the world. He asserted India is moving ahead with rejuvenated spirit. He said the country is on the road to economic development. Earlier, the Prime Minister said that India is fast becoming the preferred investment destination for investors across the globe. Speaking at the launch of multiple development projects at Visakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh, Mr. Modi said, today when the world is going through a crisis, India is achieving new milestones in several sectors and scripting history and the world is witnessing India's growth. Mr. Modi also highlighted that India has become a focal point of new ideas, new solutions and speedy development, and all policies of the government have the welfare of the common man at their core. The Prime Minister said, from drones to gaming, space to startups, every sector is now getting an opportunity to move forward.
ड्रोन से लेकर गेमिंग तक, स्पेस से लेकर स्टार्टअप तक, हर क्षेत्र को हमारी पॉलिसी की वजह से आगे बढ़ने का मौका मिल रहा है। ब्लू इकोनॉमी पहली बार देश की इतनी बड़ी प्राथमिकता बनी है। आज विशाखापट्टनम फिशिंग हार्बर को आधुनिक बनाने का जो काम शुरू हुआ है, इससे हमारे मछुआरे भाई बहनों का जीवन आसान होगा। जैसे जैसे गरीब की ताकत बढ़ेगी और आधुनिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर से जुड़े अवसरों तक उसकी पहुंच होगी, विकसित भारत का हमारा सपना भी पूरा होगा।
The Indian Home Ministry will organize the third ministerial conference on countering financing of terrorism, No Money for Terror. It will be held in New Delhi on 18th of this month. Our correspondent reports that Home Minister Amit Shah will participate in the conference and convey India's determination in its fight against terrorism.
The two-day meet aims to progress the discussions on combating terrorist financing held by the international community in the previous two conferences in Paris and Melbourne. The conference intends to bring together representatives of 75 countries and international bodies for deliberations. It also intends to include discussions on technical, legal, regulatory and cooperation aspects of all facets of terrorism financing. The conference will also be focused on global trends in terrorism and terrorist financing, emerging technologies and requisite international cooperation to address related challenges. The hosting of this conference shows the importance being given by the government to the issue of international terrorism as well as its zero-tolerance policy against this menace, with the report of Dipendra. This is Abhishek Mukhopadhyay for AIR World News, New Delhi.
Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar stated that the India-ASEAN relationship forms the central pillar of India's Act East policy. Addressing the 19th ASEAN-India Summit on Saturday, Mr. Dhankar said deep cultural, economic and civilizational ties have existed between India and Southeast Asia from time immemorial. This connect has provided a foundation to build a strong relationship in the modern times, from a central partnership in 1992 to a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2022. Hailing 30 years of the ASEAN-India friendship, Vice President said that the 3 decades have seen a multifaceted and multidimensional growth in engagements, from connectivity to climate change, security to space, education to ecology, and technology to trade, which shows the commitment towards a brighter future. The Vice President emphasized that India places great value on ASEAN as an important pillar of regional, multilateral and global order. India and Cambodia today signed 4 MOUs in the areas of culture, wildlife and health. Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar also had a bilateral meeting with Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen on the sidelines of the ongoing ASEAN Summit. Wide-ranging discussions were also held on bilateral ties, including human resource, demining and development projects. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar met his Canadian counterpart Melon Joly on the sides of the East Asia Summit at Phnom Penh in Cambodia on Saturday. Both ministers discussed issues related to the Ukraine conflict, Indo-Pacific, bilateral cooperation and community welfare. In a tweet, Dr. S. Jaishankar appreciated steps being taken to address visa challenges by Canada. Earlier in the day, the Indian minister met Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba and discussed grain initiative and nuclear concerns amid the Russia-Ukraine conflict. He also met Singapore Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan and Indonesia's counterpart Retno Marsudi. Dr. Jaishankar is accompanying Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar, who arrived in Cambodia on Friday to participate in the ASEAN-India Commemorative Summit and the 17th East Asia Summit. The summit is being hosted by Cambodia under the theme ACT, Addressing, Challenging, Together. The theme is aiming to counter regional issues, seeking prosperity, growth and stability among the states in accordance with the main theme of ASEAN.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on significance of ASEAN-India Summit and East India Summit. In conversation are Anil Vadha, former diplomat, and Arjun J. Chaudhary, AIR correspondent.
I'm joined by Shri Anil Vadha, former ambassador to the Government of India, and in our discussion we will cover the ASEAN-India Summit and the East Asia Summit. Mr. Vadha, what is the importance of this summit, the ASEAN-India and the East Asia Summit, and why is it that the dignitaries attending, the Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, they're attending this summit? What is the importance of this attendance and what does this mean for India?
So first of all, the ASEAN-India Summit, this is the commemorative summit because we've completed 30 years of India-ASEAN relations. This year is being celebrated as ASEAN-India Friendship Year in 2022. And then we also have the 17th East Asia Summit. Now, East Asia Summit deals with security and defense issues, besides a number of other cooperative areas. And in both these summit meetings, the leadership actually puts forward their viewpoints on how the relationship is going to go forward, especially the India-ASEAN Summit, which is particularly important for India's relationship with the ASEAN countries. So I believe at this particular summit, there would be an extensive discussion on geopolitical issues like developments in the Indo-Pacific, the threat of terrorism, and of course the current situation in Myanmar and Ukraine. But besides this, India always looks for major topics like review of our trade and our investments with the ASEAN countries. And lately, in the last decade or so, connectivity has emerged as a major issue coming up for discussions because of the number of projects that India has undertaken with the ASEAN countries. And finally, of course, this being the commemorative summit, we will review the status of the strategic alliance. So all these make these two particular summits important in the diplomatic calendar of India. Normally, Prime Minister Modi would have attended, but he has to also attend the G20 summit, which is going to follow very shortly in Bali. India is taking over the G20 presidency from Indonesia, and therefore, Vice President is leading the Indian delegation.
So, Mr. Vadra, you spoke about how important it is to show leadership at these summits. We have the representation from India. And as you mentioned earlier, that the regional interests are being focused on. And more importantly, the East Asia Summit is being strengthened by the ASEAN-India partnership here. Could you tell us exactly how maritime security is being approached? Because India is a border state to China, for instance, and there is Southeast Asia as well, where our trade interests lie.
At this particular East Asia Summit, there have been different plans of action which have been prepared in advance. And that happens because there is normally an officials level meeting which is held ahead of the summit meeting, and that is followed by a foreign ministers meeting, and then that prepares the grounds for documentation for this summit. So the plans of action relate to cooperation in environment and energy, in education, in finance, global health issues and pandemic diseases, natural disaster management, and also ASEAN connectivity. But besides this, the East Asia Summit will also discuss cooperation in food security, in trade and economics, and as you pointed out, maritime security and cooperation, and traditional and non-traditional security threats. Normally, the format of the summit follows statements by leaders of the countries concerned, and then afterwards, if there is room, the discussion takes place on specific issues. Maritime security has emerged as a very important component of the East Asia Summit because it deals normally with security and defense issues exclusively in a separate segment. This time around, it will depend on whether there is enough time for that kind of a discussion. But nonetheless, many of the leaders would refer to maritime security in their discourse, in their speeches. And of course, for India, maritime security was an important theme which was adapted by us after our strategic partnership developed. And the last time in 2008, when the leadership of the ASEAN came to New Delhi for the 2018 meeting. And at that point in time, India also came up with the India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. It's called IPOI, which has 7 separate pillars. Now, if you look at those 7 separate pillars, you have maritime security, marine ecology, maritime resources, besides capacity building and resource sharing and disaster risk reduction and management, and science and technology cooperation, plus state connectivity and maritime transport. So the maritime issues dominate in this narrative, and India has worked with like-minded partners in the ASEAN region, in the Indo-Pacific region in particular, to develop these themes and to work on specific issues with regard to the region. That's why the maritime security aspect is being paid attention to. The other aspect which we have constantly faced in the last decade in the context of the ASEAN countries has been the dispute in the South China Sea, given China's position vis-a-vis a number of other countries based on its historical claims according to the 9-dash line. Now, of course, that has been struck down by the UNCLOS, by the International Court, based on the UNCLOS agreement, but at the same time not accepted by China. So a code of conduct is being negotiated right now between China and the ASEAN countries. The discussions have been ongoing for a number of years. The very fact that that's being discussed shows how important it is for the ASEAN countries to reach an agreement on a code of conduct in this region.
Well, what trade blockade has resulted is a supply chain disruption, which is not just attributed to what happened because of the COVID pandemic, but also because of China's stand regarding Taiwan and certain disputed regions or islands that Japan holds. And that's led to a supply chain issue when it comes to countries like India, which depend upon key imports like chips from Taiwan. And now we have foreign direct investment in Gujarat to counter that, but it's not completely resolved. So how do you see maritime transport and port development as a way forward, and that could be discussed at this summit?
So maritime transportation came under stress because of the Ukraine war. Not so much, I would say, because of what is happening in the South China Sea by way of conflict, because there was no blockade which was imposed, but there's a fear that it could be imposed at any given point in time in the future. And because of that, countries around the world have started thinking about nearshoring or friendshoring, as we call it, and not be dependent on either one country or two countries or countries which are far away from their shores for critical supplies. So that is how this whole concept of the resilient supply chains came up, and India, Japan, and Australia formed a group to make sure that they work on critical areas which are important for them and cooperate in terms of trade in those particular commodities, because the emphasis now is on trade with reliable partners in inverted commas. And therefore, this trend is being strengthened going forward. We already see that happening in Europe in terms of making sure that they have individual capacities within Europe itself, and in the United States, which has decided that United States companies should come back and work in the United States. And even in Japan, which started exhorting its own companies to diversify and to go on to other Asian countries in order that it was not totally dependent on China. So all round, we see this trend happening. This will only get strengthened in the future. And while international trade and container trade has returned very much to the pre-COVID level, we still find that there are fears of dependency which could happen in the future. And that, of course, is something which is not openly talked about in forums like the East Asia Summit, but underlying this is the very important sentiment about making sure that the Indo-Pacific remains free and open, and the sea lanes of communication and trade remain open for countries who live in this region.
Terrorism was a major issue earlier. Is it still one today? How important is that to maritime trade and security going forward?
So terrorism remains an important issue along with developments in the South China Sea for countries of this region, for the Indo-Pacific in general. Many countries in ASEAN themselves are facing the problem of terrorism. We know that ISIS, for example, spread its wings, and this led to radicalization of many societies in the region, especially Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, which saw, and also an ongoing terrorist threat in the south of Thailand, which then spread on to Myanmar and to the Rakhine region. So obviously the ASEAN is very worried about this situation and how outside influences should be curbed. So once again, I'm sure that at this session, we will again have a lot of countries talking about it.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Southeast Asian heads of government held talks on Saturday with visiting global leaders, including U.S. President Joe Biden, who hailed the launch of a new U.S.-ASEAN pact as a critical step towards tackling the biggest issues of our time. In his first visit to Southeast Asia as the president, Mr. Biden said the region was at the heart of his administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, and Washington was committing resources, not just rhetoric, under a new comprehensive strategic partnership. He said, together we will tackle the biggest issues of our time, from climate to health security, to defend against the significant threat to the rule-based order. Mr. Biden said they will build an Indo-Pacific that's free and open, stable and prosperous, and resilient and secure. Biden will participate in East Asia Summit sessions on Sunday, including a three-way meeting with the leaders of South Korea and Japan before leaving for the G20 summit in Bali. This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
The 7th edition of the bilateral air exercise between the Indian Air Force and the French Air and Space Force, exercise Garuda 7, concluded at the Air Force Station in Jodhpur in Indian state of Rajasthan on Saturday. In a statement, the Defence Ministry said the exercise provided the two air forces with the opportunity for professional interaction and sharing of operational knowledge and experience. With meticulous planning and execution of various phases of the exercise, personnel of the Indian Air Force as well as French Air and Space Force were exposed to realistic air combat simulations and the associated combat support operations. This enabled the participating contingents to engage in wide-ranging interactions, providing valuable insight into each other's best practices. The exercise also provided a platform for cultural exchange between the Air Force personnel of both the countries. The United States Department of Treasury has removed India from its currency monitoring list. The move came hours after U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen addressed the U.S.-India Businesses and Investment Opportunities event in New Delhi. India had been on the list for the last 2 years. Along with India, the United States also removed Italy, Mexico, Thailand and Vietnam from its currency monitoring list of major trading partners that merit close attention to their currency practices and macroeconomic policies. In its biannual report to the Congress, the Department of Treasury said China, Japan, Korea, Germany, Malaysia, Singapore and Taiwan are the 7 economies that are a part of the current monitoring list. The countries that have been removed from the list have met only 1 out of 3 criteria for 2 consecutive reports.
Democratic Senator Mark Kelly won his bid for re-election on Friday in the crucial swing state of Arizona, defeating Republican venture capitalist Blake Masters. It puts Democratic Party 1 victory away from clinching control of the chamber for the next 2 years of Joe Biden's presidency. With Vice President Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote, Democrats can retain control of the state Senate by winning either the Nevada race or next month's runoff in Georgia. Republicans now must win both those races to take the majority. U.S. President Joe Biden urged all nations to ramp up their own efforts to avert catastrophic global warming. Speaking at the COP27 conference in Egypt on Friday, President Biden said the United States will meet its goal of cutting emissions 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. He endorsed the passage of a $369 billion spending package to green the U.S. economy as an achievement that would shift the paradigm for his country and the entire world. The president also announced plans to step up efforts to cut methane emissions by plugging fossil fuels leak and requiring companies to act on leaks reported by credible third parties. Before his speech, Biden met Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on the sidelines of COP27.
In Egypt, 19 people were killed and 6 others were injured when a bus fell into a canal in northern part of the country on Saturday, the health ministry said. The bus was carrying some 35 people when it derailed on a highway and fell into Mansouriya Canal in Aga town, in the northern governorate of Dhaka Hilya, according to security sources.
Turkey has appointed an ambassador to Israel after a gap of 4 years in the latest step towards normalizing ties with the Jewish state. Sake Özkan Torunal, a veteran diplomat who had served as Turkey's consul general in Jerusalem between 2010 to 2014, was named to the post in a presidential decree on late Friday, Turkish media reported. Ankara withdrew its ambassador to Israel in May 2018 and returned Israeli envoy over the Israeli army's killing of dozens of Palestinians. Israel reposted by sending back the Turkish consul in Jerusalem. On the occasion of the Public Service Broadcasting Day on Saturday, All India Radio organized a cultural program at the Rang Bhavan Auditorium of Akashvani in New Delhi. The event was held to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's one and only visit to one of the studios of All India Radio Delhi in 1947. The father of the nation addressed the displaced people who had temporarily settled at Kurukshetra in Haryana after partition. Public Service Broadcasting Day is celebrated on the 12th of November every year. During the program, the audience got enthralled by a series of spellbinding musical performance by Akashvani's renowned musicians, a musical band of BFF and students of the Delhi University. These artists presented musical performances based on Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan and songs.
Now moving on to sports. In boxing, Shiva Thapa clinched a silver medal at the Asian Elite Boxing Championships at Amman in Jordan on Saturday. Thapa lost to Uzbekistan's Ruslan Abdullayev in the finals of men's 63 kg category after he was forced to withdraw from the match midway due to an injury. This was Thapa's third silver and sixth medal overall at the prestigious tournament, which makes him the most successful male pugilist in the championship's history. With the addition of silver on the final day, India accumulated a grand total of 12 medals in the competition, including 4 gold, 2 silver and 6 bronze. In cricket, Pakistan will face England in the T20 World Cup final in Melbourne on Sunday. The match will be played at 1:30 p.m. IST. All India Radio will broadcast a running commentary of the match. According to the Meteorological Department of Australia, there is a possibility of rain. The ICC has issued new guidelines for Sunday's match, in which the reserve days extra time can be extended. If rain falls on both of the days of the final, the game will be called off. England and Pakistan will be declared joint winners.
Greg Barclay has been re-elected unopposed as the chairman of the International Cricket Council. At an ICC board meeting in Melbourne on Saturday, Barclay's opponent, Dr. Tavengwa Mukulani, the chairman of Zimbabwe Cricket, withdrew from the contest. Barclay, a former head of New Zealand cricket, will now hold his second term for 2 more years. Barclay, an Auckland-based commercial lawyer, was originally appointed as the ICC chair in November 2020.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Financial Times reports that US stocks record best day in over 2 years on cooler inflation data. The Guardian reports that Germans disgusted by Iran protest crackdown, says Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He says responsibility for violence lies solely with the regime and pledges new sanctions. The Wall Street Journal reports crypto exchange FTX files for bankruptcy, CEO resigns. The Washington Post writes that in an era of confrontation, Biden and Xi seek to set terms. Japan Times opines that Kishida and Yoon to hold talks in Cambodia on Sunday in a bid to improve Tokyo-Seoul ties, and Lemonade reports that in Afghanistan, the Taliban are accused of causing a surge in opium prices.
And now a quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says India is marching towards becoming world's third biggest economy. New Delhi to hold International Ministerial Conference on countering financing of terrorism on 18th of this month. India and Cambodia signed 4 MOUs in areas of culture, wildlife and health. US President Joe Biden pledges US will work with Southeast Asian nations together to tackle climate issues to rule-based order. 7th edition of Indo-French Joint Air Exercise culminates in Jodhpur in Rajasthan. And in sports, Shiva Thapa wins silver medal at Asian Elite Boxing Championships in Jordan. And in cricket, England to clash with Pakistan in T20 World Cup final in Melbourne on Sunday. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnava Jan, by artists from Cambodia. with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.